It all started in January 2012 at the prestigious Crockford's Casino in London, one of the oldest and most respected gambling establishments in the world. On that quiet evening, two high rollers, Phil Ivey and Kelly Sun, sat down to play Baccarat, a seemingly simple game of chance. What the casino didn't know was that this night would mark the beginning of one of the most talked about gambling heists in history, all without breaking a single law. By the end of their Baccarat session, Ivy and Sun had won millions, but not in the usual way. They had discovered a tiny flaw in the design of the cards that no one else had noticed. This simple advantage allowed them to win an astonishing amount of money, but it wasn't long before the casino realized something was off. What would come next? A legal battle that would turn the world of gambling upside down? And how did they do it? And were they allowed to keep the money? This is the story of the greatest casino heist in history.
January 2012. Poker legend Phil Ivey and advantage player Kelly Sun exploited a trivial flaw in how casino cards were printed. A flaw so small, the casinos didn't even suspect a thing. They actually helped.
Phil Ivey's name rings bells in the world of poker. Often regarded as one of the greatest poker players of all time, Ivey's career took off in the early 2000s. By 2000, he had already won his first World Series of Poker bracelet, and his poker genius was on full display. His career blossomed during the poker boom in the early 2000s, which saw the rise of online poker and a surge of new players. Ivey was not just another player, he was at the top, and everyone knew his name. But poker wasn't enough for Ivey.
By age 23, he won his first World Series of Poker bracelet, winning $195,000 in the $2,500 pot limit Omaha event. By 2003, he was an established pro.
Doesn't want Barry to know he raised him with air.
He had an insatiable appetite for winning, and his talents went beyond just poker. That's when Kelly Sun entered the picture. Kelly Sun, known as the Baccarat Queen, was a professional gambler with a unique skill set. Born in Hong Kong, Sun came from a wealthy family, but after running into legal trouble that led to her assets being frozen, she needed a way to make money fast. Baccarat, a high-stakes casino game that's simple to play, but notoriously difficult to win, was her game of choice. But Sun had a secret weapon: edge sorting. Edge sorting is a technique that takes advantage of tiny imperfections in the printing process of playing cards. These imperfections are so small that most people, even seasoned gamblers, would never notice them. However, by carefully observing the edges of the cards, Sun could distinguish between high-value and low-value cards without ever seeing the faces. This gave her an incredible advantage in games like Baccarat, where knowing whether the next card was high or low was critical to making smart bets. Sun had spent years honing her edge sorting skills, and when she met Phil Ivey, the two of them saw an opportunity to make a fortune. Ivey had the charm and bankroll to get into the world's most prestigious casinos, while Sun had the expertise to exploit their weaknesses. Together, they planned a series of high-stakes Baccarat games that would earn them millions, all without breaking a single law. At least, not technically.
People lock up their wins? Nope. I'm gonna go right on over to another casino and play some more.
3:45. You got a 5 o'clock tournament. You got millions of dollars in prop bets. So what are you gonna do? You're gonna shoot dice.
That's right. It gets my mind clear. Eventually, I gotta go bust it. I guess it's just a matter of time. I want to make everybody happy. They keep saying, "How did this guy do play craps and play poker as high as he does, and ends up always ending up?" Well, I don't know either.
But pulling off edge sorting wasn't as simple as walking into any casino and hoping for the best. Ivey and Sun had to be meticulous about their setup. They targeted two major casinos: Crockford's in London, one of the oldest and most exclusive casinos in the world, and the Borgata in Atlantic City, a top destination for high rollers in the United States. To make their plan work, they needed specific conditions. First, they required the casino to use a particular brand of cards known for having the imperfections necessary for edge sorting. Second, they requested a Mandarin-speaking dealer to make Sun feel more comfortable and allow her to communicate more easily.
Their very first request is to allow Ivy to have a guest sit with him while he plays. That's vital. That's Sun. Sun is the one who mastered the art of edge sorting, and the plan cannot work if she's not by his side, telling him how to bet. Then they requested a Mandarin-speaking dealer. And this is actually the linchpin of it all. Superstition is the rule in Chinese gambling culture. Variants of Baccarat played in Macau, China, even allow the players to handle the cards and often rip them, all in the name of luck. They were planning to leverage Sun's Chinese heritage, make her appear like a superstitious gambler, and throw the eyes in the sky off the trail. Using this cover, they can make odd requests to the casino, and it will just look like the whims of a superstitious gambler. A Mandarin-speaking Baccarat dealer is experienced in accommodating all kinds of odd, superstitious requests, and generally won't raise a fuss or think anything of it. And the very request alone adds to Sun's cover.
You know, one of the interesting things, I remember I was speaking with Richard about you when we first started doing the story for the Sunday Times, and he goes, like, what's so brilliant about the play is that you applied it to Baccarat, the game where you can bet huge sums and where the casinos don't sweat it the way, like, they're used to people paying that kind of money, and they don't sweat the action at Baccarat, especially if you're Chinese. It helps.
Macau style. Using Sun's cover as a Chinese gambler, they requested that the dealer rotate quote-unquote lucky cards 180 degrees at Sun's request. This would allow them to edge sort without ever touching the cards. The dealer would be doing it for them. So if a 9, a good card, comes out, Sun can simply say, lucky card, in Mandarin, and the dealer will turn it 180 degrees, as we did in our example, thus edge sorting the good cards. Use specific cards. Some cards are easier to edge sort than others. They might have a more distinctive pattern or simply just a larger pattern. For instance, these Borgata cards have a very distinctive and large pattern on the back, making them easy to edge sort.
Finally, Ivy, with his celebrity status, convinced the casinos to rotate the high-value cards for superstitious reasons. The casinos, eager to accommodate such a famous player, agreed without realizing that this seemingly innocent request was the key to their strategy. With everything in place, Ivy and Sun began their high-stakes Baccarat games. Thanks to Sun's expert edge sorting abilities, they knew when to bet big and when to hold back. Over the course of several months, they won $10 million at Crockford's and another $9.6 million at the Borgata. The casinos had no idea what was happening. To them, it just seemed like Ivy was on a lucky streak. But in reality, Ivy and Sun were using their keen observational skills to exploit the casino's own equipment. What made this heist so remarkable was that they weren't using any traditional methods of cheating. They didn't mark the cards, bribe the dealers, or use any hidden devices. All they did was observe what was in front of them and use that information to their advantage. In many ways, it was the perfect crime, except for one thing. The casinos eventually caught on. Crockford's was one of the first to suspect that something was off. After reviewing the footage of Ivy's games, the casino realized that something more than luck was at play. They decided to withhold Ivy's winnings, triggering a legal battle that would drag on for years. Crockford's argued that while Ivy and Sun hadn't technically broken any laws, their use of edge sorting violated the spirit of the game. They claimed that the duo had exploited a flaw in the system in a way that was unfair to the casino. The case went to court, And in 2014, a UK judge ruled against Ivy, stating that while edge sorting wasn't illegal, it did constitute cheating under UK civil law. The judge argued that Ivy's requests to have the cards rotated and for a specific type of deck indicated that he wasn't playing the game as intended. Ivy, of course, appealed the decision, but after several rounds of appeals, the ruling stood, and he was forced to forfeit his winnings. Meanwhile, in the United States, the Borgata also caught on to the scheme and sued Ivy for the $9.6 million he had won at their casino. The Borgata made a similar argument to Crockford's. While Ivy hadn't broken any laws, his actions were unfair and went against the principles of fair play. In 2016, a U.S. federal judge ruled in favor of the Borgata, ordering Ivy to repay the full amount of his winnings. Ivy once again appealed, but just like in the UK, the ruling stood.
Mr. Ivy is a professional gambler. He won approximately £7 million over an evening and the following morning from Crockford's casino in London. When Crockford's reconstructed what he had done from the closed-circuit television recording, it became clear that he had developed a highly sophisticated system. Crockford's had never met this practice before. When they worked out what he had done, they refused to pay, so he sued for the £7 million. Whether he was entitled to it or not depended on the end on whether what he did was cheating. It was no doubt true that Crockford's might have been better prepared than they were if they'd known about the practice, but if they were cheated, they weren't liable to pay. The judge and the Court of Appeal both held that what had happened was cheating, and so Mr. Ivy couldn't claim the money. This court agrees that it was cheating. The key point is that Mr. Ivy did not just watch the cards with a trained eye, but rather took active steps to fix the shoe. If he'd got surreptitious access to the shoe and rotated the cards, then that would clearly be cheating. He achieved the same by duping the croupier, and that is cheating as well. So his appeal fails.
Kelly's son, for her part, didn't escape the legal fallout either. She was seen as the mastermind behind the edge sorting technique and was widely criticized in the media. However, despite the court rulings and the loss of their winnings, Sun never saw herself as a cheater. In interviews, she insisted that she had simply used her skills to outsmart the casinos. After all, if the casinos had used better cards or paid closer attention, none of this would have been possible.
Cheater next to your name, especially in my business, it's really bad. And casinos, they take cheating and advantage play as the same thing, when it's a big difference. They spend millions and millions of dollars on game protection, and it's their job to protect their game. And I'm viewing the casino as my opponent. It's my job to try to exploit weaknesses in the house.
The fallout from the heist wasn't just financial. Ivy's reputation took a significant hit, especially in the gambling community, where he had long been seen as a fair and honorable player. The legal battles tarnished his image, and many wondered whether his success at poker had been built on similar strategies.
He made him look bad. You know, he played him for a chump. I do not believe that that was cheating. He did not alter the elements of chance. He didn't alter his wager. He didn't mark the cards. He did not physically do anything. They did it for him.
Nevertheless, Ivy remains one of the most successful poker players in history, with over $30 million in career tournament earnings, and his place in the Poker Hall of Fame is secure. As for Kelly's son, she became something of a folk hero in certain circles, admired for her ability to outsmart the casinos. While her gambling days are mostly behind her, she occasionally reflects on her exploits and the lessons she learned from her years in the high-stakes gambling world. She has said that her focus now is on her family and moving past the controversy that defined her career. The story of Phil Ivey and Kelly's son raises interesting questions about the nature of cheating and fair play. On the one hand, they didn't break any laws. They didn't alter the cards, bribe anyone, or use any hidden devices. They simply used information that was available to anyone who knew how to look for it. But, on the other hand, their actions clearly violated the spirit of the games they were playing. The courts ultimately decided that their edge sorting was cheating, even if it wasn't illegal. The casinos, for their part, were quick to respond. In the wake of the Ivy Sun heist, many casinos around the world implemented stricter measures to prevent edge sorting and other forms of advantage play. These measures including using cards with uniform edges, preventing players from requesting that cards be rotated, and improving surveillance techniques to catch edge sorters in the act. However, this wasn't the first time someone had managed to outwit the casinos and walk away with millions. Decades earlier, in the 1970s and 1980s, a man named Tommy Glenn Carmichael pulled off one of the most notorious slot machine scams in history. While Ivy and Sun relied on observation and skill, Carmichael used physical manipulation to beat the house. Tommy Glenn Carmichael didn't start his life as a career criminal. In fact, if you hadn't met him in the early 1970s, you might have thought he was just a regular guy living a simple life. Born in 1950, Tommy grew up in the era when Las Vegas was becoming a hub for glitzy casinos and high-rolling gamblers. Yet Carmichael wasn't involved in that world at first. Instead, he owned and ran a small television repair shop, doing the kind of work that most people might consider boring but steady. However, Tommy's life wasn't as steady as it seemed. As the 1970s rolled on, Carmichael's shop started to struggle. It wasn't bringing in the kind of money he needed to support his lifestyle. Facing financial ruin, Tommy began to consider other ways to make money, ways that didn't involve waiting for customers to come in with broken televisions. He was smart, and more importantly, he had a background in electronics. This gave him a unique skill set that would come in handy in the world he was about to enter.
The casinos didn't even suspect a thing. They actually helped Ivy and Sun win money.
During the production process of cutting casino cards, the cuts of the edges are not identical, making it possible for a trained eye to identify certain cards by their edge designs.
Las Vegas, as many of you know, was built on gambling. Casinos raked in massive amounts of money from tourists and locals alike, with one of the most popular attractions being the slot machines. These machines, glittering and spinning with the promise of instant riches, were everywhere, and they were Carmichael's first target. While most people viewed them as simple games of chance, Tommy saw something different. He saw a machine, one that, like all machines, could be manipulated if you knew how it worked.
A flaw so small, the casinos didn't even suspect a thing. They actually helped Ivy and Sun win money.
During the production process of cutting casino cards, the cuts of the edges are not identical, making it possible for a trained eye to identify certain cards by their edge designs.
Over just 9 months of gambling with this advantage, they won over $20 million from some of the world's most prestigious casinos. And they pull it off playing Baccarat, a game that is unbeatable under normal circumstances. They found the closest thing to a free money hack that could potentially be milked for millions over the following months or even years. But greed opened the door for casinos to fight back. This is the story of the greatest legally executed casino heist, where millions were won before the casinos could fight back.
At this point, slot machines were mostly mechanical, meaning they relied on physical parts like reels and levers. This wasn't the high-tech digital world we live in today. Back then, a man with Tommy's knowledge of electronics could see how these machines operated, and more importantly, how they could be tricked.
How much more are you playing?
Tommy's first big break came when he discovered that inserting a small metal rod into the machine could cause it to pay out a jackpot. Essentially, he had figured out how to rig the machine to think it had hit a winning combination. It sounds simple, but in practice, it was a genius move. Tommy didn't need to rely on luck anymore. He could create his own fortune, one jackpot at a time.
Maker is our chip leader at this point. Don't expect him to do anything huge, but he's looking at ace queen, so he's going to make some sort of move. He bet 60,000.
Carmichael began to test his new technique in casinos all around Las Vegas, and to his delight, it worked. He was able to win small amounts of money at first, but as he refined his methods, he began pulling in larger and larger sums. Soon, Tommy was making more money from slot machines than he ever had fixing televisions. But here's the thing about Carmichael. He wasn't content with just getting by. He wanted more, and he knew that he couldn't do it alone.
A complete amateur just beat the world's best professional players and took home $2.5 million. All from one entry into an $86 online tournament. The world watched at home on ESPN and rushed to online poker websites like PokerStars.
Realizing the potential to scale up his operation, Tommy decided to bring in a few trusted associates. He needed people to help him run his scheme across multiple casinos, especially since hitting the same casino repeatedly would have raised too many red flags. His new team would help keep things running smoothly, with each member taking turns playing the machines and keeping an eye on security.
Drawing a flood of bad players trying to win it big. It was like printing money for pros like Ivy. And no other pro took advantage of this boom like Ivy. Tens of millions in online poker winnings, millions more.
Carmichael's crew was small but effective. Together, they targeted casinos like the Riviera Hotel and Casino, a legendary spot on the Las Vegas Strip that was known for its high-rolling clientele and numerous slot machines. The crew was careful, making sure not to win too much at any one location. But over time, the money started to add up. Hundreds of thousands of dollars poured in as they rigged machine after machine, walking away with bags of cash. It was, in many ways, the perfect crime. Slot machines weren't monitored as closely as other forms of gambling, like poker or blackjack. Casino security was forced on card counters and scammers at the tables, not on the harmless-looking folks sitting at the slots. And besides, slot machines were seen as random. No one thought they could be manipulated so easily. But Carmichael knew better. His background in electronics gave him insights that most gamblers and even casino security teams couldn't begin to fathom. He was using their ignorance to his advantage, and it was working beautifully. Over the next few years, Carmichael and his team continued to rake in enormous profits from Las Vegas casinos. It seemed like nothing could stop them. However, in 1985, Tommy's luck ran out. After several years of successful heists, casino security teams began to catch on. While they didn't fully understand how the slot machines were being manipulated, they started to notice patterns. Tommy and his team had won too often in too many places for it to be a coincidence. Suspicious casino owners hired investigators to look into the matter, and it wasn't long before Carmichael's scam was uncovered. Tommy was arrested that year and charged with felony theft. He was convicted and sentenced to 5 years in prison, bringing his first wave of slot machine heists to an abrupt end. For most people, this would have been the end of the road. A prison sentence would have scared them straight, forcing them to abandon their criminal ways. But Tommy wasn't like most people. During his time in prison, Carmichael used his incarceration to reflect on what went wrong. He realized while his technique had worked well for mechanical slot machines, technology was changing. Casinos were beginning to phase out the old mechanical devices in favor of newer electronic machines that were supposed to be harder to rig. But where most people would have seen this as a setback, Tommy saw it as an opportunity. After his release from prison, Carmichael immediately went back to work, but this time he wasn't going to rely on his old tricks. He needed a new method, one that could outsmart the new electronic machines. After months of experimentation, Tommy invented a device called the top-bottom joint.
His gambling reputation provided ample cover for their scheme. So using Ivy's high roller reputation, they planned to approach casinos with a set of demands.
This was essentially a light wand that could be inserted into the slot machine to interfere with its sensors, tricking the machine into paying out even when no jackpot had been hit.
We have 3 cards, an ace, a queen, and a 6. Our goal is just to pick the ace. On a random guess, we have a 33% chance of guessing correctly. But if we use edge sorting, that turns 33% into 100% accuracy. We have the same types of cards we used in that example. Half diamonds on one edge, full diamonds on the opposite edge. These are just red. All 3 cards are currently oriented with the half diamonds on the left edge. But if we know which card is the ace, we can simply rotate it 180 degrees, and then the full diamonds are on the left edge of only the ace. The other 2 cards have the half diamonds on the left edge. So we can shuffle these 3 cards 100 times, a million times, as long as we don't rotate them 180 degrees. The edges will still be sorted. So after shuffling, we lay our 3 cards out, and we just look at the edges.
It was a brilliant piece of technology, and it allowed Tommy to return to the casinos with renewed confidence. With his new light wand in hand, Carmichael started winning again.
Lucky card in Mandarin, and the dealer will turn it 180 degrees, as we did in our example, thus edge sorting the good cards. The next, a private table and area. Ivy's significant fame in the gambling world would draw too much attention at a public table. Besides the fact that gathering fans would be a distraction, someone might catch on to what they're doing, so they needed privacy. Use specific cards. Some cards are easier to edge sort than others. They might have a more distinctive pattern or simply just a larger pattern. For instance, these Borgata cards have a very distinctive and large pattern on the back.
Just as before, he brought his team along with him, running the scam at multiple casinos across Las Vegas. The top-bottom joint worked like a charm, and the money began flowing once more. But this time, the casinos weren't as easily fooled. The advent of electronic slot machines also meant that casino security was improving. Surveillance systems were becoming more sophisticated, and security teams were better trained to spot suspicious behavior. Carmichael's new scam lasted for a while, but it was only a matter of time before the casinos caught on.
And the first thing they needed was a high roller reputation. Casinos don't bend the rules of their games for anyone. If you're betting $10 a hand in blackjack, a casino will never change the rules of a blackjack game to favor you. But they'll go out of their way for a whale. So this part was easy for them. Phil Ivey was one of the most notorious gamblers in the world. And this is actually the linchpin of it all. Superstition is the rule in Chinese gambling culture. Variants of Baccarat played in Macau, China, even allow the players to handle the cards and often rip them, all in the name of luck. They were planning to leverage Sun's Chinese heritage, make her appear like a superstitious gambler, and throw the eyes in the sky off the trail. Using this cover, they can make odd requests to the casino, and it will just look like the whims of a superstitious gambler. A Mandarin-speaking Baccarat dealer is experienced in accommodating all kinds of odd, superstitious requests and generally won't raise a fuss or think anything of it. And the very request alone adds to Sun's cover.
You know, one of the interesting things, I remember I was speaking with Richard about you when we first started doing the story for the Sunday Times, and he said, he goes, like, what's so brilliant about the play is that you applied it to Baccarat, the game where you can bet huge sums and where the casinos don't sweat it the way, like, they're used to people paying that kind of money, and they don't sweat the action at Baccarat, especially if you're Chinese. It helps.
In 1996, after nearly a decade of continued success, Tommy Glenn Carmichael was arrested once again, this time for his use of the top-bottom joint. Once again, he was convicted of theft and sentenced to another stint in prison, but this time it marked the end of his career as a slot machine manipulator. The casinos had finally caught up to him, and they weren't about to let him slip through their fingers again. After his release, Tommy finally decided to call it quits. He had spent decades manipulating casinos, making millions in the process, but the risks had finally outweighed the rewards, and he knew it was time to walk away. Interestingly, Carmichael eventually began working with casino industry experts to help them develop new technologies that would prevent future scams like the ones he had pulled off. In a strange twist of fate, the man who had spent years cheating casinos now was helping them catch other cheaters. They've learned from their mistakes. Security measures in Las Vegas are now some of the most advanced in the world. Slot machines are tightly monitored, and the kinds of tricks that Carmichael used are no longer possible. But his story will always be remembered as one of the greatest casino heists in history.
It was nearly impossible to lose, so long as they played a large enough sample size. Here's a table representing their advantage over the house based on the first card drawn in Baccarat. Ivy and Son's bets are highlighted in green, and it shows which bet they would make based on what Kelly Son's edge sorting told them was coming next. So if a quote-unquote bad card, like an ace, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, king, queen, whatever, anything that's not a 6 through 9, was coming out, they would bet on the banker hand. And as you can see, even a quote-unquote bad card gave them an advantage for every single card.
The Riviera Hotel and Casino, where much of Carmichael's early success took place, closed its doors in 2015. It had been a landmark on the Las Vegas Strip for decades, but changing times and increased competition led to its demise. Still, for those who remember its glory days, the Riviera will always be linked to the incredible heists pulled off by Tommy Glenn Carmichael and his team. That's a wrap for today, but you don't want to miss what's coming next. Next week, we're diving into the most incredible story you've never heard, the one that's going to leave you speechless. Psst, by the way, subscribe now or you'll miss it.